I grew up in Greenville, South Carolina, when Greenville was really one block downtown, and it went from the Hyatt to Trio. I thought we had made it big when we got our Fuddruckers. So we've seen extreme growth in Greenville. I think it's a great example of a public-private partnership and managing growth and growing with a strategic vision. So it's been great growing up in Greenville. Shortly after that, I went to Washington and Lee University. There I played basketball, and there 9/11 happened. And I had two grandfathers who served in World War II in the Pacific. One was in a B-24 bomber squadron. He left my grandmother in November of 1942 and went and island hopped throughout the Pacific. He returned home in December of 1945. And they call that generation the greatest generation for a reason. And I grew up loving to hear stories from both of my grandfathers. The other grandfather drove Marines ashore, online, onshore, in places like Okinawa. So we have some Marine background in my family. But just felt really called with 9/11 to serve my country, to lead Marines in combat, and to take the fight to Al-Qaeda, who had attacked our country. So in November of 2004, I went into the Marine Corps. I was commissioned as second lieutenant, and I picked up command of 1st Platoon Lima Company, 3rd Battalion, 8th Marines at Camp Lejeune. And it was there in March of 2006 that I was tasked to take my Marines to Ramadi, Iraq, and to take the fight to Al-Qaeda. Our mission in Ramadi was to secure all of Anbar province, bring peace and stability to the region, and it was a big challenge. At that time, Ramadi was the Sunni capital of the world. It was a very urban, dense population, urban combat environment, and it was known as the graveyard to Marines. It was known as the most dangerous city on earth, and we were there to bring stability to the region. How we did that? We actually thought outside of the box, and we really looked at the entire landscape in Iraq, and what we determined was, and what you never really got on TV, there were so many different types of insurgent groups over there. It wasn't just Al-Qaeda, it wasn't just Sunnis, it was multiple groups of insurgents. But what we did, we boiled the insurgent groups down to two categories. One, Al-Qaeda, and you can't negotiate with them, you either have to kill or capture them. But then there was another group of Sunni nationals, and they were composed of sheikhs and imams, formal tribal leaders, and former military leaders within the Iraqi army. And what we determined, when you looked at their goals, they wanted a strong Iraq, they hated Iran, and they wanted us to leave. But they wanted peace and stability for the region. So the greatest sales job that I've ever had to do was to ultimately convince the Sunni nationals to quit fighting us, to partner with us in order to go after Al-Qaeda together. The way I kind of describe it is pick a neighborhood in Myrtle Beach to where there are 100 homes. And 90% of the homes are peaceful people, and they want to raise their families and just live normal lives. And then you have 10% of that 100 are terrorists. And that's kind of what Ramadi was. And only by partnering with the local Sunnis were we able to know really who Al-Qaeda was and systematically remove and target them. So that's what we did. Over the course of 7 months, I led over 300 combat missions. It was a tough fight. My platoon earned 1/3 Purple Hearts from casualties, and the battalion lost 18 killed during those 7 months. But in the end, our way worked. We saw a decrease of enemy attacks by 80% in our 7-month deployment. And then 6 months after that, all of Anbar province was secured. So it was a huge accomplishment. If you read history books about that time, they've renamed it the Great Awakening, and we were a part of that. I tell people that leading Marines in combat and fighting for my flag was by far the greatest honor of my life. A lot of politicians pander, in my opinion, about standing for the flag. I think it takes a unique individual to actually fight for his flag, and that's what I did. I went on a second deployment, which only my mom was happy about, it being very boring. so I won't waste your time with that deployment. But shortly after that second deployment, I came out of the Marine Corps, and I faced what a lot of veterans face, which is I would get the job interviews, and then at the end of the job interview, over and over and over, I would hear, "John, we really appreciate your service, but we don't feel like you have the necessary, quote, real world experience or, quote, industry experience to hire you." So at that point, I had to create a job. And I compliment my wife for actually being my company's first angel investor, because she had a steady job and it allowed me to become an entrepreneur and start a company. So I started a company called Lima One Capital. A lot of people ask the question, where did I get the name? Lima One was actually my call sign in Iraq. So I wanted something that was meaningful, something unique. I really wanted to use my second call sign. It was much cooler for a Marine, but it was Nightmare. So Nightmare Capital in 2009. I'm not great at marketing, but I probably was smart enough to realize that that wasn't a winner. So I started a company called Lima One Capital. My first employee was my company gunnery sergeant from Iraq, who's a retired 22-year master sergeant in the Marine Corps who'd been on 9 deployments and had 5 combat action ribbons. So we really built the company together. We started with $1 million investment, and today we've grown it to over $1 billion. So we lend to real estate investors throughout the country. We lend in 42 states. We have 80 full-time employees in Greenville, South Carolina. It was really important for me to headquarter that company in my home state of South Carolina, even though all of our financial investors on Wall Street kept trying to convince us to move to New York or move to Charlotte. But we're headquartered in Greenville. We have about 250 to 275 employees scattered throughout the 42 states in which we lend. We've been recognized as the fastest growing company in South Carolina, one of the top 10 best places to work, and the most ethical company. So not only have we had tremendous amount of growth, we've more than doubled every year, but we've also done it the right way, and we've had a tremendous impact on the communities in which we lend, with a lot of new construction development, a lot of rehabs. So very proud of what we've built at Lima One. That really brings me to why I'm here today and why I am running for governor. I'm a native of South Carolina, and I love my state with a passion, and I truly believe that we have everything going for us as a state, and I believe it starts with really our geography. You know, we have unbelievable beaches down here, we have unbelievable mountains in the upstate, but I firmly believe that the heart of our state are our people. And overall, our people are God-fearing, they're honest, they're hardworking, and they're conservative. And when you look at what comes out of our state government, if you look what the legislature produces in Columbia, it is the antithesis of our core values as a state. So I'm getting into this race because I love my state and I want to make it better. To me, being governor is a means to the end, which for me, the end is making our state better. So that's why I'm running. When you look at all of the state, I truly believe that the only thing that can hold us back as a state is our state government. And when you look at all the problems that are going on right now, just to name a few, we have Santee Cooper, the state-owned power plant where we lost, as taxpayers, $4 billion. I am the only person in this race that has actually had the common sense to call for the firing of the Santee Cooper board. When you look at the board, it has totally mismanaged the nuclear project. We've lost $4 billion. And on top of that, the Santee Cooper board allowed their CEO, who oversaw the $4 billion loss, they didn't fire him, they allowed him to retire, and he now receives an $800,000 a year pension. That to me is criminal. And when you look at the most basic common sense of firing the board, I said, why am I the only candidate to call for this? So my campaign team did some research. I'm the only candidate that hasn't taken any money from any of the board or anyone in the energy sector. So Henry McMaster, He has taken $115,000 from SCANA, Dominion, and Santee Cooper. Mrs. Templeton, she's taken $15,500 just from Santee Cooper. So one thing to know about my background is being a successful businessman, like Trump, it allows you certain privileges, and the biggest one is I cannot be bought. So I will always represent the taxpayer. I will always do what's in the best interest of our state, and I don't have to pander to anyone, and I don't have to sell out for $15,500 or $3,500 or $20,000. I will never sell the taxpayers out. When you look at some other issues throughout the state, I'm a huge college football fan. There are 160 D1 college football teams out there. If my team finished dead last, I would be appalled. But that's the state of our education. We are 50th, dead last in the entire United States. And when you look at that reason, it's not a money problem. Liberals will try to convince you that we need to spend more money, but that's not the solution. We spend over $13,000 a year per student throughout South Carolina. That is a ton of money, $13,000. So why is our education system so bad? Well, when you look at where the money goes, less than half of that $13,000 ever reaches the inside of a classroom. And you say, well, where does it go? It gets caught up in the bureaucracies. It gets caught up with the superintendents, the school districts. Just to give an example, Florence County, a relatively small county in our state, has 5 school districts. And what does that mean? It means you have 5 superintendents, 5 CFOs, and you go through the administrative overcost of that, and it's money that is wasted that should be consolidated in order to pay teachers more. We have a huge teacher shortage. We need to pay teachers more, and we need to bring down class size. We need to bring more innovation to the classroom, and that's what I want to do as governor. Some of the other problems we have, with this next problem, I didn't even know it existed until I got in the race. But we have 110 state agencies. 110. And you say, well, why does that exist? I have no idea why it exists, and I don't think anyone else does. Do you know how many computer systems we have as a state because of that? Anyone want to take a guess?
110.
110 computer systems. That is so wasteful. So some of the things that we need to do is to bring accountability-based budgeting to all those state agencies. A lot of the state agencies need to be consolidated, combined. We need to do an audit that encompasses all of the state agencies. The outside auditing agency needs to ask 2 questions. One, how do we improve customer efficiency? Or how do we improve state agency efficiency, which means how do we save taxpayer dollars? And number 2, how do we improve customer service? Because I come from the business world, and I look at government as a business. It should at least be tried to be run like a business. And the purpose of government is to serve the taxpayers and to serve the citizens, and that's through customer service. And we need to get back to that, and that's what I'll do as governor. Finally, I'll give another example. Our roads are utterly abysmal as well. And again, we don't have a money problem. We have absolutely no strategic vision for our roads. And a few senators are allowed to dominate where all of the money goes. A lot of it goes to Florence, Hugh Leatherman's district, and the rest of us throughout the state suffer. I am well aware that a lot of people around here want I-73. A lot of people in Charleston want 526, and there should be a strategic plan in place to prioritize the roads that are in existence, and also to bring economic opportunity by creating additional roads throughout the state where they're needed to support the growth that is happening throughout our state, because the growth is significant. And then finally, I will tell you, the other thing that needs to get reformed is we have got to change our tax system. There are only 8 states in the entire union that have higher taxes than South Carolina. I didn't know that stat either. Only 8 states have higher taxes than South Carolina. And when you look at who bears the burden of those taxes, it's probably everyone in this room. It's hardworking South Carolinians that create jobs, that take risk. Those are the ones that are penalized. I met with an entrepreneur who was very, very successful in Colombia, and he told me, and it's one of the saddest things I've heard, he told me that the biggest regret he has, and he's a native, the biggest regret he has is he actually started the company in South Carolina. And I said, well, why is that? And he said, well, if I'd started it outside of South Carolina, they would have rolled out the red carpet for me to move it. And he said the company across the street, they moved into South Carolina. They pay nothing in commercial property taxes. My buddy, he pays $286,000 a year. Wow. So we need to get rid of the special interest loopholes. It's unbelievable the amount of special interest carve-outs for the sales tax that have been afforded. We need to eliminate those, and if we do that, we can decrease the income tax and decrease the sales tax by half, just by getting rid of special interests. And that's what we need to do. Finally, I will tell you that we have to have term limits. I am a strong proponent that the only way to save our state and save our country are through term limits. Because two things will happen if we get term limits. Number one, we'll see less corruption because the politicians will not be beholden to the special interests like they are now to get reelected and reelected and reelected. And then the second thing is, if your, I would say, deployment only has to be 6 or 8 years as a legislator, you're going to see a lot higher caliber person being willing to serve. I have a hard time convincing my friends to go to the State House or the State Senate because they say, I don't want to go down there for 20 years and accomplish nothing, just in order to accomplish something in the next 10. So with term limits, it's an equal playing field. We have plenty of high caliber people throughout the state that can serve in those capacities, and that's a way to restore our country. So the way I look at this race, I really believe that we are electing the next leader of our state, the next commander-in-chief of our state, and I will tell you that in leading over 300 combat missions and in growing $1 billion company, leadership comes down to 3 things. It comes down to a person's core values, who they truly are at their core, and I will tell you that I'm a conservative, I'm a Christian, I believe in business sense, I believe in common sense, and I believe in service. And I'm the only one that has a track record of true service to their country running in this race. And I believe that we need to take those values to Columbia. Secondly, leadership is all about a person's core competencies. We can no longer continue to send people that have never been successful in the private sector and expect our state to get anything different than what it's currently getting. And everything the state legislature touches, it just is abysmal. So we need to start bringing people to Columbia who have actually built companies, who have actually signed the front of a paycheck rather than always signing the back of a paycheck, because it's a lot different on how you value money when you do that. And I will also tell you, we need someone that has actually created jobs. There is no one in the race that has actually created jobs other than myself. And finally, leadership is composed of courage. We have a very entrenched political class in Columbia. We have a very entrenched special interest group of lobbyists and career politicians that do not want to hand power back to all of us in this room. They only want it for themselves because they're the only ones benefiting from it. And we have to have someone who is willing to take the fight to that group and represent the common man, represent the taxpayer, and get our state back. So one story that I always tell in these talks is about one of my favorite Marines, and his name's Mickey Ouellette. And Mickey checked into our unit right before we deployed to Ramadi, Iraq. And he was from Ohio, and he had this chiseled face, and you could tell he worked out a lot, and I remember thinking, I do not want to mess with this guy. But Mickey performed well in Ramadi. He came back. He was promoted to fire team leader. He went on a second deployment. He came back. He was promoted and accepted a third deployment to Helmand Province, Afghanistan. And it was there where he was a squad leader. and he was tasked with a seek and destroy mission to kill and capture Taliban forces in the area. And when he was on that mission in March of 2009, he was ambushed, his entire squad was ambushed in a complex attack, and an IED went off. And it severed Mickey's leg, and it peppered his whole body full of shrapnel. And at that point, Mickey had two options. Number one, he could have called for a casualty evacuation of himself and potentially survived. Or two, he could have stayed in the fight and continued to lead his Marines, and that's what Mickey did. He actually called on air support, missing a leg, bleeding out, in order to protect his Marines and to take out the Taliban forces. And every one of his squad members are alive today because of it. Mickey passed away on the chopper ride home. He won a Navy Cross for that. And I tell that story for two reasons. First, I know we have a lot of veterans in this room. I tell that story because today's generation of veterans, the men and women that are standing on that wall to protect all of our freedoms, there are a lot of Mickey Ouellets in that group, and they're the ones that are protecting us in this room tonight, and you should all rest easy that they're standing guard for all of us. And the second reason I tell that story is because Mickey's ultimate decision when the time came down to either Mickey or his Marines, and he clearly chose his Marines. And I promise you that as governor, there are going to be tough situations, but I will always put the taxpayers before anything that would benefit me politically. I'm only getting into this race because I care about the people in this room and I care about my great state, and that's why I'm running. So I will always put all of you first and all the citizens throughout South Carolina. So I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you. We've had an amazing reception to our message. I think it resonates. I think people are tired of the same old, and they're ready for someone that's qualified, competent, and proven in the private sector to lead this great state. So I would love your support, and I'm happy to take questions if you'd like me to take questions, or take it wherever you want to go.
Sir, I have a question. The South Carolina Constitution gives a tremendous amount of power to the state legislature, very little power to the executive branch, and almost no power to the judicial branch. So what will you bring as far as leverage to the executive branch that would counter our legislative false assumption that they can tax and spend their way to a prosperous South Carolina?
So, great question. Another way other people phrase it to me is, love the agenda, how are you going to accomplish any of that?
Right.
So, I think you have to look at it, and the way I look at it is an 8-year deployment. And it is going to be a hard fight. It is an insurgency. I feel like I'm giving up one insurgency in Iraq to come back to another one in Colombia. But it's going to be a tough fight. You have to have realistic expectations and a strategic plan on how you're going to accomplish what you want to accomplish. And it starts with, what can the governor control? So initially, out of those 110 state agencies, the governor can only control 16.
Right.
As sad as that is, that's the governor's power. So you have to bring in outside auditors to improve efficiencies, which means save taxpayer money, and then improve customer service. That is going to be so successful that you can apply pressure on the legislature to do that to all 110. I think we can consolidate a lot of them, and the legislature right then doesn't necessarily have to give up power, but you'll have a track record of success to where the legislature is almost forced to do that. And that's kind of the carrot. And Marines, we believe in the stick. So what we ultimately have to do, we're going to systematically target any state legislator or state senator that does not want to go along with my reform conservative agenda. We're going to target them. We're going to recruit quality candidates to run against them. I'm going to help finance them. I'm going to campaign with them. And we're going to change the entire composition of Columbia. Because the only way you're going to change the system is to change the legislature. And I really believe that, especially in the House, we have some amazing legislators down there who are fighting the good fight. and the Senate holds up everything. We have a lot of freshman House reps who have proposed revamping the state constitution. But again, the people that have the power who have been down there 40 years, they don't want to give any of that up. So you got to take them out, and then you can institute a new constitution, which will include term limits. That's how you do it.
Well, Nikki Haley tried to do the very same thing, target legislators, and she wasn't successful. 3 right here, she targeted, they all won. The other thing is, are you sure that we're 50th in education?
I'm 100% sure.
Well, when Beasley was running, we were at 48th. And Hodges said to him, we've got to get rid of him because we're 48th in the nation. So we digressed. So we're 50th now. So you're telling me that not only Hodges, but Sanford and Haley have done a very bad job.
Well, see, the
Because
problem,
we went backwards instead of going forward. How
I'm
did
not,
that happen?
I'm not saying it's their fault, because
But how did it happen?
because what happens is, right now, when you look at what the governor can control with education, so you have all these people give these great speeches and say, here's what we need to do with education. I'm no different. You got public
Well, how are you
charter
gonna
schools
change
and
it?
all these different things.
How would you change it?
But right now, you have to change the legislature to give more authority to the governor. Right now, the governor has very little authority with the education system. What needs to happen is, we need to make the superintendent of education a governor appointee and a cabinet member. We need to make the state school board appointed by the governor. We have tried it the bureaucratic way and the legislative way, and it's gotten us to 50th in the country. The governor has to have more control over the education system, and to do that, you got to change the legislature.
I don't think Spearman would like to hear that. She's the superintendent. Now she thinks she's terrible. She was just the other day, I was speaking to her, she was telling me all the positive things he's done for education.
50th
And
in
she's
the country.
blaming it.
50th in the country. 50th in the country.
I heard you.
And when you say that,
I'm
you know,
shocked.
she doesn't like to hear what I have to say,
Well, I don't think
there
so.
are a lot of people, most people in Columbia, they don't like to hear what I have to say because they're threatened. So she would be one of the first people to go on the chopping block.
Can I give you my insight on that?
Huh?
And my insight on that. To invest in good school, I believe that you need to invest in the future. You need to give them more salaries, more benefits, more things that they want to come to a job, and then you will get the best quality of teachers. This is how I believe to invest in people. What I see right now is a lot of vacancy in teachers, not very good school, not a lot of teachers want to come to work because their salary are really worse.
Right, yeah.
It's
true.
like the policeman, it's like every other.
But that's why you
aspect.
have to bring accountability to the educational system.
Yes.
You have to get more money. There are over 250 bureaucrats who never see the inside of a classroom in our
Yeah.
educational system that make over $150,000 a year. Our average teacher salary is $37,000. So we have to cut out the bureaucracy up here to get more money to the classroom, but it doesn't just stop there, because I really do not feel like teachers are our problem. Now, they're way underpaid, but they're still good. The other
I'm not
problem
saying
is
that
we
they
need
are
to bring
not.
innovation to our education system.
Yes.
Kids right now, when they graduate, they are not prepared to go to college, and they are not prepared to go to the workforce. And that needs to change through a different type of curriculum. We need to bring back, you know, every kid doesn't need to go to college. If they can go work at BMW for $80,000 and go to a
Right.
trade school, that's a heck of a living.
Can I give you, I hope that you will.
I'm
really-
afraid you're gonna start running against me.
I'd like to add a couple of cents under this.
I'm just kidding.
I came from Israel, although I live here for a long time of year, and I love it, and I like to improve things I like people. I like win-win situations, but I want things to work toward the people. And in Israel, you know, after you graduate school, you need to go to the army, and it teach them really how to implement and to be prepared for life. you know, and you know that you served in the army, and it gave you a lot of tools.
Marines.
I
A
served
lot
in
better than the
Marines.
Army.
Okay, for me, it's the army in Israel overall. I believe that you need to put in the education system, even from high school, all the years of high school, kind of education system when they teach the kids how to prepare themselves to live outside, to prepare themselves economically, even to give them life tools, everything out there, because not all the kids come from the same level of economic level, and a lot of them miss that.
And I think with public charter schools, you can do that, and it's been done where a lot of public charter schools assume that the kids are not going to get anything, including food, when they go home. And that's a model that you have to go to. So, yes, sir.
A couple of thoughts on this whole thing. First of all, coming from a business standpoint, and I'm sure your business has conducted, surveys of personnel. Giving a pay raise never has ranked in the top 5 of retention of personnel.
It's number 7.
Thank you. Never ranked in the top 5. So that's one that I'm tired of hearing from everybody. Oh, give him a raise, give him a raise. Now, granted, no, wait a minute. I've got a son-in-law who's a teacher, so hey, this would be fantastic. But it's not the first thing we have to attack. I've got 2 neighbors live across the street. One just quit school about a year and a half ago as a teacher. Science, biology, math, physics. She walked away from it. Why? The bureaucracy. Her husband, or as soon as she finishes her medical degree, her husband is quitting. He's one of 3 shop teachers in Horry County, or carpenter teachers. He is forced to teach reading in class, not because the kids need it, but because it's teaching for the tests. Okay? So what are we going to do about the bureaucracy? You've already kind of mentioned that. And that's one of the key things. You want retention teachers? St. James is supposed to be a really highly rated high school in this town, or in the state. They're going to lose 28 teachers this year just because they're fed up with the bureaucracy, with all the new rules, with all the testing, teaching to test. They've just had it. Okay, we need to do that first. By the way, if we get rid of all the billions of dollars we're spending on test taking, we're going to improve the teacher's salary because we can take that money and put it there. So that's one key thing. But there's a number of other issues that have been brought up as far as things go. If anybody here has heard the name of Pat Milley,
Yeah.
I think she's got a whole list of things, and it also addresses the opioid issue, and it ties it all together because that's where we're starting our kids on drugs. So what are some of the plans, or if you haven't got any, maybe develop those things, because I know it's going to come up in the race, to deal with the opioid issues that are going on. And Horry County is one of the worst in the state, and South Carolina is one of the worst in the nation, and it ties back to putting the kids on drugs in school so that they learn, hey, if I got a problem, I go to a drug. And then they continue that. Any thoughts on the opioid issues?
So, I mean, I agree that it's a serious problem. I think, almost every problem in South Carolina it has a direct cause, but it also has a systemic cause. Mm-hmm. And I think when you talk about taking, Christianity out of schools, the breakdown of the family, when you go through all these different things, that's the result of our current society. So now we have to manage, as a result, all these problems popping up. And I think with the opioid, it's serious. We need to use some common sense. A lot of it is, you have to start monitoring how many prescriptions are going certain places. There's an example to where the number of opioids that went to, it was either CVS or Walgreens, was like 10 times more than the entire population in that city. So that needs to be monitored. We need to bring some common sense. I'm friends with Eric Bedingfield, who's a former state rep who lost his son to the opioid crisis, and he's a huge proponent of we've got to do something on a national level to really make the doctors stop prescribing it. And he gives the example for him, his son had a broken ankle, I think it was from a soccer injury and started taking opioids. Prescription ran out, turned to heroin, and then ultimately overdosed. So we've got to do something, but I think it's a larger part of the systemic problem in society. Yes, ma'am?
I was involved with reading buddies at the elementary school in Myrtle Beach, and we learned that 80% of the children in elementary school in Myrtle Beach live in poverty. Poverty is a very, very serious thing, and it also leads to a lot of the systemic issues that you're speaking about.
I think poverty is a huge problem, and I don't want to paint the picture of every school in South Carolina is 50th in the country. That's not the case. We have some amazing schools, but overall that's our education system, and it's also due to a lot of these impoverished areas. There was a terrible neighborhood in Greenville, and I have a family friend who invested $4 or $5 million of his own money to buy a school, and he started a public charter school called Legacy Charter. And this is in an area of Greenville to where it was one of the top 10 crime-ridden areas in all of the country. And only about 13% of the students in that area ever went to a 2 or a 4-year college. So he came out with the belief that you have to assume that those kids are going to get nothing when they go home. They're not going to get read to, they're not going to get education, they're not going to get athletics, and they're not going to get food. So for him, it was started with increasing the entire school day. So the kids, they have to be there at 7:30. School starts with a meal. You get a lunch, and then you get a heavy afternoon snack that ultimately for a lot of those kids counts as dinner. He makes sure they have PE. It's the only school in the entire state that's public to where they have physical education every day. Because right now, a lot of people don't want to talk about this, but obesity among children is a huge epidemic. And one of the reasons is because of the way we eat and the amount of exercise that they get. So that's part of the thing. The results of that school have been unbelievable, transformative for that, not only the kids, but also that entire neighborhood. So the first graduating class that went through the entire high school, 100% of those kids were accepted to a 2 or a 4-year college. Not only that, the entire neighborhood has been transformed. The crime is down. There are businesses starting to come into that area. It has really restored pride in what was really an area where I would say previous to that school had no hope. And I think that is the model that we can bring to so many schools, and they're not doing it, at any higher cost than a lot of these other schools. They're just doing it more effectively. Yes, sir.
Hi, John Pruitt. I went to see Captain Templeton. I was impressed, and then some of my friends who were at that gathering said they were impressed with you and asked me to come here. So, first of all, I want to thank you for serving our great nation.
Thanks.
I mean, who doesn't love a Marine?
So hopefully I won you over already.
That's a good start.
I brought friends to pressure.
We need a fighter. That's a good thing. And the status quo hasn't worked. As a lender, an issue that's close to my heart and who I've worked with our legislators on is predatory lending. And what are your feelings about that?
What are with predatory lending laws? We don't run up against it just because our rates are not that high. So I know it's
Not you personally, but what would you do to help change that?
I know it's state by state. So what is the predatory lending
Well,
rate
give you an
right now?
example in New Jersey, which you would
But
think-
what is it here?
Yes, it's 19% in New Jersey, it's 21% in New York, it's 3,600% in South Carolina.
Yeah, I mean,
Wow.
that's pretty high. So, I mean, clearly,
Our citizens are losing their cars, it's just gotten out of hand.
yeah, I mean, it's a problem. I would be in favor of reducing that significantly. I think that's unreal.
Try to have a question.
Yes, sir.
Of the 16 agencies that you, as governor, could control, which one would you attack first?
Well, the one I want to attack is DOT. Now, I don't control it. I get to appoint some people to it, But one of the things that needs to happen is we need to abolish the DOT commission and get rid of it. It's just an extra layer of bureaucracy. We need to roll the state.
Transportation Infrastructure Board.
We need to get rid of that, roll it into DOT. So that's one of the places that would have the biggest impact. I would start with all 16 that I control as governor in terms of the auditing, and then once I start there, push the legislature to do it across the board. You're gonna just, I guarantee you, those things are run so poorly, those 16 agencies. You just audit all of them, change them all within the first year, and you're gonna apply so much pressure to do that across all of the state agencies. That's how you start bringing real change to, I would say, for the taxpayers and for accountability of our tax dollars. Yes, sir.
Well, just like when they passed the lottery, they said it was gonna improve education. All it did was, the school budgets were reduced. And now they're saying, you know, there's trouble with the lottery. So, you know, there's something wrong.
But I think what happens with all of these different taxes, you know, I consider all the fees, they don't want to call them taxes, that's a form of taxes. And all of these taxes and fees ultimately create these huge slush funds that they tell us, hey, we're going to use this slush fund for what? Last year it was roads, right? Hey, if you just go along with the largest tax increase in the history of our state, it's going to all go to the roads. We're not going to tax you again. It's just a lie. And then they get these slush funds and they start divvying up because they ultimately think that that money is theirs. They do not realize that it is ours. And we have to have someone fight for us and change that mentality and start holding them accountable.
David Hutch with Myrtle Beach SC. You know, when we talk about influence, I think influence is a problem in South Carolina politics. We have people in this room that have 1,000 people on their Twitter. We have people who have 1,100, 1,500 people on their Facebook pages. They've created these groups. We are clear that some big businesses have some influence and some senators have some influence. One of the issues I have in attending these things, residents in South Carolina don't seem to have enough influence. If you're going to lead and you're going to work for us, I keep hearing, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? What I'd like to hear is, how can we organize and mobilize residents so that once we elect you, more than a yard sign, you actually have the will and the power and the marching army behind you to get things done in Columbia? Because that's where we lose them. Once they get elected, that's where we lose them to big business, big interests. And if we had a Reagan Revolution army behind you and you led for us, doggone it, this room, these people, I know some of these people, we could get things done.
He's talking about lobbyists. They have too much influence.
I get it, and I think, you know, one of the things, look, in terms of his antics, I don't agree with all of the stuff that Donald Trump does, right? But his policies have been unbelievably great for our country, and one of the things that he's in a great position because he's not beholden to anyone because he doesn't need their money. On a statewide level, I'm very similar. So the only reason I am going there is to help fight for our conservative values and restore our state. Because for me, going down there and being governor is a means to an end, and that is making our state great. The difference is a lot of other people, their elected position, regardless of whether it's a legislator or governor, their end is the position. And that means they're willing to sell us out in order to keep that position.
Well, people are crying for leadership, and what you just described yourself, just in your opening address, that shows leadership. That shows people that maybe they should take a second look at you. And if you can drive that home, that would be a start in the right direction. Because they're crying. You say one thing here, and then you go up to Columbia, and you do entirely different.
Yeah.
But what you just said here, how you started your business, no one would give you a job, and you had to start your own job. Thank God for your wife that helped you. That shows that you have the drive and you have the perseverance, and you're a success. That's what people are looking for, success.
2 more questions.
You brought up the business aspect. What are your plans for Lima One Capital during the 8 years you've governed?
So it was one of the toughest decisions I had to make, but ultimately, one of my mentors told me, if you're going to be a successful entrepreneur, you got to start with burning the ships, which means there's no going back. If you're going to start this company, you're all in.
Well, are there
And with-
rules?
And
about
with running for governor, I burned the ships. So I am no longer CEO of my own company. I am now chairman. I did a national search. I brought in an amazing CEO, but I'm no longer running Lima One. I'm all in to win this governor's race, and that's what it took, and that's what I did.
Where do you stand on registration by party?
To me, it is total common sense that Republicans and true Republicans should be electing and selecting Republicans.
Sir, thank you for your service,
Thank you.
first of all. I have a question. In your political program, what space is there for little businesses and entrepreneurs that do not have large capital? I mean, I am an entrepreneur and I find my hands tied. Banks do not allow loans, business loans like before, unless you have solid guarantees. In the other hand, the government do not favor small businesses unless you are a single mother or a woman of color, which I am neither of them. I'm married and I don't belong to minorities. So a person like me, which started her own company, what does they do? How do you
I started a business in a very similar manner. First place I went was a bank, and the bank said, if you deposit $1 million, we'll loan you $1 million. So, banks don't believe in risk.
I understand.
In terms of all the government programs, I didn't qualify for that because all of mine was tied to real estate, so that excludes that. Ultimately, I found private investors to start. I was living in Atlanta at the time, part-time, and got introduced to a guy that had just sold his business and took this meeting at Goldberg's Bagels on 285. And this guy walks in and he has this raggedy t-shirt, hasn't shaved in a long time, shorts and flops. I don't mean that. He's got jeans on. And he's shaved. So I see this guy, and I'm thinking, what a waste of time. But what I realized is, if you're worth 9 figures, that's how you dress. And I convinced him to give me $1 million. He charged me 8% interest, and that $1 million, from there I did a private debt offering, and from there I did an equity raise, and by 2014 we were backed totally by Wall Street. So if you can get the idea out there, there are people that will finance it.
Oh, this indeed, just, I think that for sense of justice, government should stay out of private initiative. Of course, if I'm worth it, I'll find a way. But I don't agree on the fact that taxpayer money goes into programs to finance businesses just because someone belongs to a minority or something like that.
I say
do
that,
anything about that?
I say overall, government should only provide fertile soil
Correct.
for the business environment, and government should never choose winners and losers. And that's a lot of time what happens.
Thank you, sir.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
By the way,